I'm Evan Kassof. I'm the Media Marketing and Concert Production Associate for Network for New Music, and I'm really excited to be joined here today with Jan Krzywicki, who's Network's conductor, and Ed Schultz, who is one of our longtime ensemble members and a flute player. And we're here today to talk about a really interesting piece that's going to be on the program this upcoming concert, Bob Capanna's Stira. And so I kind of want to stay out of the way of this conversation as much as possible, because I know you both have a much more interesting relationship with the piece than I do, because I'm relatively new to it. So I guess I'll open with, I know Bob Capanna was on the Network Advisory Board. He was an integral part of kind of building up Settlement Music School. And I was wondering if you both could just talk a little bit about your personal relationship with him and his music, and we'll kind of start there.
Well, maybe I'll start because I think Ed may have gotten to know Bob shortly after I did. I may be wrong, but Bob and I were students together at what was called the Philadelphia Musical Academy, then went through a number of other name changes before it became the University of the Arts, which it is today. And Bob was a composition student, as I was, of Joseph Castaldo and Theodore Antoniou. And I remember playing piano in his sextet, which had a number of things inside the piano, which I worked out carefully. And then one of the performances was moved to the Art Alliance, and everything inside the piano was different. And I was scuffling to get that together shortly before the concert. In any event, so we shared a lot of music together. We listened. And both Bob and Karen were very dear to me, as I know they were to Ed. So maybe, Ed, you could talk about your relationship with them.
Yeah, I first got to know Bob through working with his wife, Karen Fuller, the harpist. We had a duo together after she started to play with the Pennsylvania Ballet, as I also played with them. And we had some great success and did some very adventurous programming. And so I got to know the family through rehearsing at their house. And, back then it was just their first son, Stephen. And it was really a wonderful thing to get to be close to them. And Bob actually wrote a piece for us called Variations for Flute and Harp back in 1986. And at about that same time, he handed me this manuscript. It looks, I don't know if you can see it very well, but looks like that. Bob had really nice, crisp writing style in his manuscript. But he said, maybe someday you'll do this. And this is actually the first time that I will have done it in this performance coming up. But anyways, he, it was really great to know him. He had a good sense of humor and was very, very brilliant. And of course, he was head of Settlement Music School too, where I taught. So, and at about the same time, he began to actually conduct contemporary music in an ensemble that kind of paralleled Network's work at Settlement Music School called the Settlement Contemporary Players. I'm going to guess that lasted for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
And Ed, Stria, the date on that is 1981. And then as we chatted once, he has revised 2010, I think. But right. We couldn't find hardly any differences between them, right?
Yeah, I did notice some different things at the end and maybe a few more dynamics. It's a very dynamic piece. It's it's got really interesting rhythms, and I'm kind of curious to know how people will hear this, because for me as a performer, it's basically in 2/4 time, or no, actually 4/4 time all the way through. Quarter note equals 120, so it's just boom, boom, boom. But all these rhythms are popping all over the place within that, and I'm feeling those pops kind of quirky, and I don't know how that's perceived when you don't have a beat going along with it in your head like I do. So I'll be interested to hear how people perceive that. but it's got a lot of character, and it's a lot of fun to play it, actually, and challenging.
Yes, yes. One of the ways I hear that piece is it's initially an opposition between a cantabile line and then these short notes. They stand apart from one another, and then they kind of integrate, and then they sometimes pull apart again. So you got that do do re, and then boop boop beep bop bop, that kind of stuff. You know, they separate, then they start coming closer together, and they separate again. That kind of thing. Is that make any sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. I actually wondered if you had any other insight into his compositional style. I mean, it's called Stria, means, I believe, in Italian, rose. Do we have any sense of
No, I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think like I'm really glad you both kind of just had this conversation, because I was going to ask a little bit, like, Ed, you know, what do you, obviously there's like the dynamism of the piece, but like what is it like to prepare this now, like when you've had the manuscript for so many years? Have you like thought over the years about kind of coming back to it, or like what has the preparation process been like?
Yeah, I did originally, like way back, I did look at, you know, back probably around 1990 or so. I probably I took a look at it and pulled it out, and I thought, well, I don't have an occasion to play this right now, and I knew it would be a challenge to get it up to speed, to get those rhythms to, you know, I'm the kind of guy that starts at like a tempo where I can play it perfectly, and then gradually bring it up to speed. You know, that kind of systematic preparation. And so I never came close to getting it up to 120 before, and now I have, and it's really popping. So it's fun. But also, you know, the manuscript I showed you is not what I'm working from. I'm working from the newer version, which was actually printed out on a computer, and it's 5 pages long rather than 2, because those were big pages he gave me. It was really huge. So it's a little bit easier to read that way. I like bigger notes.
You know, I'm remembering now that I was at the premiere of the piece, actually. Bob wrote it for Linda Wetherill, the flutist, who at that time was the wife of Dave Wetherill, the principal horn in Philadelphia Orchestra. And the performance was in an art gallery, and before playing the piece, Linda spoke a little bit about it and put the 2 pages up. I think they were exhibited on a music stand for people to come and look at, because she was very struck by the way it looked on those 2 pages, and thought everybody would be interested to see it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I actually thought that, you know, when I said earlier about, and I'm not proposing this, by the way, but I thought that it might be an interesting thing when I said that I didn't know how the audience would be able to perceive the sense of beat when you've got all these accents that are like a 16th off. I thought it might be interesting for them to actually see the music. I mean, I imagine we've thought of that before for other network things, but I don't think we've ever necessarily done it, because in a way, you know, I'm sure the composer wants people to just be thinking with their ears rather and hearts, rather than seeing and trying to read and figure it out that way. It's a different kind of listening experience that is probably not the ideal for how a composer wants their piece to be heard. But it would be interesting for someone to be actually following it along and see, oh, that's what's going on there. Yeah. So.
I mean, I will say I'm really excited by that idea. I think it is kind of cool to do that, but I think we're all really sensitive to this idea that like we should just be listening with our ears and our hearts. It could be, I think we have the technology to maybe show the score before you play it, just to kind of give people a sense of the way in which that structure is built, if that's something that you think might kind of like help them get that initial footing into the piece. Because I think one of the challenges we always have when we're like performing, you know, new pieces or pieces that haven't really been heard is not just like, you know, telling the story or whatever that's in the music, but also like teaching people the language that story is told in as well. And
Sure.
so I'm curious because Jan, I know you're also like you kind of control the state of music, right? For Bob, is that do I
Well,
understand that correctly?
yes, I was entrusted by Bob to take care of his musical estate, which ended up in the University of Pennsylvania Library. And if you Google Robert Capanna, that will come up as the first thing. And they did a wonderful job of putting that all together and making it available to the public. Um, you know, Ed, you were talking about how how this piece starts at quarter equals 120 and it just goes and it just stays at that. And, I think back to Bob, who was such a straight ahead person. He didn't suffer fools and he didn't get involved with special effects and things like that. I think he found that kind of cheap in some ways. This piece is a lot about him as a person, I feel. And the way he develops his material. He was very dedicated to taking a small amount of material and making something happen with it, and not just going for cheap effects here and there. I think he was very principled and idealistic in that way.
Mm. Yeah, as I've worked on it, actually, I mentioned the flute harp piece, the variations. I haven't heard that piece since Karen and I played it back in like 1987 or so, when we would have premiered it. And but as I've been working on this, it's like suddenly that piece is back in my head. It's like I can hear, the beginning of it, the harp and and the flute popping out these little very rhythmic moments at the beginning. And so, as all really fine composers do, he had a language that's recognizable. I think that's so if you heard a piece that he wrote that you didn't know, it's like, I bet that's one of Bob's pieces. It's like kind of recognize the particular characteristics, because his character does get into it.
Yeah, that language could be very spiky, but it could also be lyrical.
Yeah. I remember I think one of the movements of the flute harp thing was lyrico. Yeah.
As this is ritmico ma lirico. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Rhythmic but lyric. Yes. Yeah, but also lyrical. Right.
Exactly. Maybe that's where I saw it.
Right.
Yeah. So in addition to the variations, he did write for Karen and me a nice arrangement of the Debussy Afternoon of a Faun, which I've seen some other editions of like flute and piano versions of this, but it worked so well with for the two of us, and we did get to perform that as well. It's a piece that in orchestra starts out with just the flute alone, and there's a big flute part. It's on all the auditions for orchestras, and this gave us a chance to really just do that, just the two of us, which was pretty special. Beautiful arrangement.
Well, you mentioned those variations for flute and harp that you and Karen did, and that was really a difficult piece for harp. But being married to a harpist, he knew exactly what could work, and he would run everything by Karen. And I remember looking at all the pedals and how fast they were going. I said, "Karen, how do you do that?" He says, "This is the limit." She said, "You can't have any more pedal changes than this."
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sure he made it go a little further than she would have liked that way, but
right.
But she was willing.
And unfortunately, I think he didn't write for harp, except in a larger ensemble circumstance after Karen passed away. Yeah, and Bob didn't go for what's the word, fast, loud playing. He was he didn't like virtuosic displays. I think he found that sort of embarrassing sometimes. That was part of his approach to music.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like, technically in Stria, there's nothing that's overly well. There's a couple of things, a couple of moving notes between some high things that are a little bit challenging, but I'll make that work. But for the most part, it's all about the lines and the quirky rhythms and that. So there's nothing that's like, you know, fireworks in the fingers or anything like that. It's very different than that.
I remember going to a performance of his once, and each of the composers had to get up and say something about their piece. And, you know, this composer, that composer, well, I was thinking about, you know, the cosmos and these different things, and all they going on and waxing and waning about all of these relationships and extra musical things. And Bob gets up there and says, well, my piece is basically about harmony and counterpoint. You know, just basic music. It's about music, you know. So not extra frills, etc. Just good, hard musical thinking.
Sure. I think back when I was a member of the ensemble of the contemporary players, there would be times when we'd be playing, he'd be conducting some other composer's work. He'd be like, "Why did he write it this way? This is not what people hear. Let's kind of fix that and make it so that you're basically doing the same thing but in a simpler way." And I felt that his writing actually changed a little bit himself as well and became more rhythmically simple in its the writing, especially after he started writing on the computer. I felt like, okay, he's not going to write these little 30-second note rests and fives and all that. And I think that happened, but his music certainly maintained its language after he made that change.
Yeah. For me, maybe Bob's most wonderful piece is that late string trio piece, Too Light, Like a Sudden Waking, that Network did on a concert and then also at his memorial service. And if you look at the score of that, it's really very simple. It's, you know, eighths, sixteenths, some quarter notes, etc. Occasionally a quintolet, etc. But it's not complicated, and but he makes a really wonderful poetic statement with those limited materials.
Excellent. Yeah.
As a younger composer, I always find myself kind of on this precipice of valuing just like, Jan, kind of what you're talking about, like music for music's sake in a way, and then also trying to balance that with those bigger extra musical things that I think have become so prevalent in contemporary music these days, about like, you know, the piece can't just exist in a vacuum. There's all these expectations of pressure and stuff. And so having a work really come out of like this idea that it's notes talking to each other, I'm really excited for.
Well, you know, we've been talking about Bob's solo flute piece and chamber music, etc. But you know, we should remind people that he had a piece done by the Philadelphia Orchestra, Reliquaries, a piece done by the Philadelphia Singers. Network, as we mentioned, had done his piece several times. Colorado String Quartet did his music. So it got around, and he had some very distinguished performances of larger pieces. So I'm very pleased that Network for New Music has scheduled this solo flute piece of Bob. It's not often that Network does a piece from 1981, however later it may have been revised, because so often there is good music that gets left by the wayside. And we're so dedicated to doing pieces that were written yesterday, that pieces that were written 10, 15, 20 years ago also deserve to be heard, and especially the music of Bob Capanna. He wrote some really wonderful music, and I hope that not only Network but other organizations can continue to program his music.